There are a ton of options when it comes to finding the right motorcycle. This can be especially confusing for new riders. So this week we'll look at some things to consider when you're motorcycle shopping. You know, a rider's going to develop their skills faster on a motorcycle that meets these 5 conditions. First, let me just mention these 5 conditions, and then we'll go back and we'll discuss each one briefly. First, the motorcycle's got to be the right fit for them. So start small and move up. Something that they can get both feet down. The weight of the motorcycle is not excessive, and the power of the motorcycle is not excessive. So what do we mean by right fit? You know, finding the right fit on a motorcycle is not like buying a car or a truck. In general, any driver can drive about any car or truck on the market as far as fitting in the vehicle. You know, there's some exceptions on the extreme, like a driver who's 6'10" probably wouldn't be real comfortable driving a Corvette, but in general, the average size driver can drive about any car or truck on the market and be relatively comfortable. That becomes less true in the world of motorcycles. Things like seat height, riding position, reach to the handlebars, whether the foot pegs are forward or rear controls. Like on a cruiser, you'll have forward controls, or on a sport bike, there'll be more to the rear. All of those have a huge impact on the rider's ability to be comfortable on the motorcycle. And comfort is more than just feeling good during and after the ride. It has a direct impact on the rider's ability to handle the motorcycle. So I love the look of sport bikes. And the Ducati Panigale is one of my favorite motorcycles as far as looks go, but I've never been comfortable with the ergonomics of sport bikes. And as I've gotten older, that's become even more true with my bad knees. I used to have a Yamaha XSR 900. Love that motorcycle. While it wasn't a true sport bike, it was sporty in nature. And the foot controls on it were a little to the rear, but were higher to give the bike more ground clearance. I did a track day on that motorcycle a few years ago. And during the last session of that day, man, my knees were hurting so bad. And because of the pain, it was becoming my primary focus, thinking about how bad my knees were hurting. So I knew when that happened, it was time to get off the track and to park the bike for the day. You know, the ergonomics of the bike will impact your comfort level, which has an impact on your ability to focus and control the motorcycle and to ride the motorcycle for any length of time. So giving advice on fit is difficult because what fits me might not fit you as well. I know some riders who say they're very comfortable on a sport bike. That's never been the case for me. So my advice to you is to sit on as many different motorcycles as you can. If they allow test rides, you know, test ride as many different styles as you can. But also understand that a 15-minute test ride is not going to tell you how well you'll feel after a full day of riding. But after some trial and error, you'll begin to realize what fits you well and gives you the most comfort and control. Once you've got that figured out, that there's usually several motorcycles within that category of motorcycles to choose from. So if adventure touring bikes fit you well, there'll be a lot of different motorcycles within that category that you can choose from. But for me, if it's not comfortable and something I feel comfortable riding, it's off the list. Even if I like the looks of it, that Ducati Panigale, you won't ever see one of those in the background, because to me, the motorcycle comfort is king. You also want to find the right first motorcycle, and this is very important for new riders. I met up with a rider once and we rode out for lunch, and I didn't know anything about this rider prior to meeting up. He showed up on a brand new, fully dressed Harley touring motorcycle. We met at a designated parking lot, and he was already there whenever I arrived, so I didn't see him ride up. So we headed off to lunch, and he rode behind me, and I'm watching him in the mirrors on the way to lunch. And I could tell immediately that he was very fearful about riding this motorcycle. His stops were very tentative, his corners were tentative, and turns from a stop were even more hair-raising. So as we sat at lunch and talked for a bit, I started asking him about the motorcycle and learned that he'd been riding for a few months. He took the MSF class, he passed with no problem, and then he went out and bought his dream $30,000 motorcycle. I asked him if he was practicing any on the motorcycle, the stuff that he learned in the MSF class on his new bike. And he said he went to practice once and almost dropped the motorcycle trying to do a U-turn. And he didn't want to drop such a nice bike, so he hadn't practiced since then. You know, one of the biggest hindrances I know of to develop your skills on a motorcycle is exactly what this rider did. He was terrified of dropping his beautiful motorcycle, and as a result, that hindered his ability to ride the motorcycle very well. So if you find yourself in the same situation as a rider, I'll encourage you to do the same thing I encouraged him to do. Go out and buy a used, inexpensive motorcycle and develop your skills on it. If you buy something that's already has some nicks and some dings on it, you'll get it even cheaper, and then you're not as concerned if you drop it in the learning process. Just understand the techniques that you learn riding that smaller motorcycle are exactly the same techniques to ride the larger motorcycle. They're just much less forgiving on that larger motorcycle than they would be on the smaller one. So if you come to a stop on a small motorcycle and the handlebars are slightly turned, the bike's going to want to fall over to that side, but you can often keep it from falling because the weight is more manageable. If you come to a stop on a large touring motorcycle and the handlebars are turned, it's going to fall over. At some point in the lean process, the only option is to get out of the way because that bike's going over. So starting on a smaller motorcycle is probably one of the most common pieces of advice that new riders will get, and perhaps one of the least followed pieces of advice. You know, I get it. You want to be proud of your motorcycle, and nobody wants to show up at a bike night on a Rebel 250, but I promise that it's more embarrassing to drop your big motorcycle in the parking lot at bike night than to show up on a smaller motorcycle. So swallow your pride. Buy something manageable to learn on. If you have to and your pride won't allow you to ride in public, you know, ride privately, but learn to ride that motorcycle and master that smaller bike before you lay out the big money on your dream bike. It'll end up costing you less money in the long run. You'll be a better rider, and you'll be a better rider much faster if you learn on a manageable motorcycle and one that you're not as fearful about dropping. So this next tip, especially for newer riders, is you want to get something that you can get both feet down. When you're learning to ride, especially, this is important. As you master riding techniques, it's not as important. You know, my right foot rarely goes to the ground when I'm out riding. I pull up to a stop, I shift into first, I keep the clutch squeezed, I keep the bike in gear, and my left foot goes to the ground. As I leave, my left foot comes back up off the ground, and I'm on my way. My right foot will occasionally go to the ground if the pavement is uneven or on a really windy day, or for some reason if I don't make a very smooth stop. And more so often if I've got a rider on the back, I'll get both feet down for extra security. But for a new rider, it's important to have that extra security in place and to be able to easily get both feet on the ground. On my Goldwing, especially since I put that new seat on there, I have a much harder time getting both feet flat-footed on the ground, but that's not as important because I've mastered the techniques of stopping the motorcycle. Because just like everybody else who learned to ride, you'll need some extra security at times to keep from dropping that motorcycle until you master the techniques. The next two tips kind of go hand in hand. You want the weight of the motorcycle to not be excessive, and you want the power to not be excessive. Now, power and weight are not very forgiving to a rider who's learning to manipulate the controls, and the more forgiving the motorcycle is in these two respects, the quicker the rider will develop their confidence and ability to move to larger, more powerful motorcycles. You know that we talked about that weight. If a motorcycle is big and heavy and it starts leaning over, it's going to go over. The same is true for that throttle. If a rider's not good at manipulating the clutch and the throttle, a powerful motorcycle can quickly get away from them. But here's a bonus tip that's good for all riders, regardless of their skill level. If you have the option of ABS or no ABS when you're shopping for the motorcycle, always opt for the motorcycle with ABS. ABS saves lives. It's proven that motorcycles with ABS are involved in significantly fewer crashes. For those of you who say that ABS gets in your way when you're out riding, either you don't know how to properly use the brakes or you're riding much too aggressively for the street. For those of you who say you can stop quicker without ABS, I'd say that might be possible for the 1% of riders who ride professionally and practice emergency braking more in a year than we would do in a lifetime. But also understand that these riders are doing this under ideal pavement and tire conditions. They're not braking when their fear level is through the roof and a car is pulled out in front of them. They're not on an oil-slicked road with gravel and road debris on it. ABS is a life-saving backup plan when you get ham-fisted with the brakes, and that can happen to the best of us out on the road when you get in a panic situation or the road conditions are less than ideal. So if you have that option, ABS or no ABS, I always recommend ABS. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this subject. What do you look for when you're looking for a motorcycle? What do you find most comfortable? So leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this idea. Till next week, guys, it's Kevin with MC Rider, and I'll see you on the road.